Morning. Hope you're all enjoying Explore. So you might be hearing about a lot of technical geeky things. Today I'm going to talk about a little lighter topic and how it can be useful to all of us, right? So and which is important as well. So my name is Varghese Philipose. I'm okay. Okay, sorry for that. Yeah, my name is Varghese Philipose. I'm a Principal Technical Adoption Manager or Principal TAM out of the Customer Success team within VMware. I'm also part of the global field and the Office of CTO where I lead few initiatives mostly on sustainability and mostly focusing on product innovations with along with sustainability and focusing on Aria operations. Uh, and had been with VMware for 11 plus years, and over these 11 years, I had been working closely with Aria Operations itself. So, quickly looking at the agenda, I will quickly go over overview on the sustainability and how it is important at this point of time, right? And then we will jump into details of how carbon transparency is applicable within Aria operation, what can be done within that, right? And then I'll go through a little bit of use cases, and then the key thing, green VMware green score, what we have with them. Okay, so starting with things, right? Like you hear about all these key buzzwords, global warming, climate agreement, and net zero targets, decarbonization strategies, all of those things, right? But then how can IT help in this? How can IT admins, specifically the vSphere admins, help on that, right? So that's what we are going to look at this. How can IT contribute to this? How can IT contribute to your sustainability goals within the corporate, within your organization, right? That's a key thing which we are looking at there. Now, before going into that, why focus on sustainable operations, right? So if you look at this very simple example, if you are talking about a data center of like about 2,000 server racks, and if it takes about, and if it is consuming about 10 megawatts of power, if you look at the cooling charges needed and cooling emissions needed, it really needs 15 megawatts for that particular data center. And then when you are talking about the power to be generated for powering on that, including the emissions, losses, grid losses, and all of those things, we need to have power generated for 43 megawatts. This is equivalent to the power needed for a city of 30,000 people, right? And this is a simple example of one data center. Talk about the global scenario, right? All the hyperscalers. What are these hyperscalers? These are all data centers, right? And if you consider the total power required, power used by the data centers globally, and if you consider it as an IT industry as a country, it will be third to US and China. So that's how big it is, right? And that's where we, as in the IT industry, can definitely do a lot and contribute a lot in sustainability and reducing the power consumption. Now, in the today's world of carbon reporting, we need to think about like scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emission. Scope 1 emission is basically the emissions directly from the power generator, which is basically the emissions from the car, your own vehicles, and all of those things. And scope 2 is basically the indirect emissions from the power you purchase. So that's what we will be focusing on, because that is the scope 2 emissions are those emissions coming from the data center, or your own on-prem data centers. As you move to the cloud infrastructure, that becomes the responsibility of the cloud providers. That's what we call scope 3 emissions, right? So basically we will be looking at scope 2 emission with which you can measure the carbon emissions within your on-prem data center. Now, what VMware had been doing, right? So sustainability had been embedded into every product, everything what we had been doing. Think about ESX, right? The ESX, when we started off with ESX, that helped in consolidating or reducing the power consumption, right? That was basically how it was there. So every product you talk about within VMware help in consolidating the data center, and that's what we had been doing. And we had been, our vision always had been to build a more sustainable, equitable, and secure digital future for us. And we had set like 30 goals to be completed by 2030. That is what we call as 2030, our VMware 2030 agenda. And also with the other things, we had been basically working with, you might have heard about the EGDC, European Green Digital Coalition, where we signed up with EGDC as well early this year, and then had been trying to work and contribute to the missions of EGDC as well. Now, as I've mentioned, right, sustainability is there embedded into anything or whatever we do. If you look at this journey, right, every customer is in any one of these portions, right, starting from server virtualization and then consolidation, all of those things, right? So this is where we call it the cloud sustainability maturity model. And this is where we are trying to help customers in driving the sustainability goals and driving more into that. Now, when we talk about the sustainability innovations within VMware, it is basically focused on 3 goals. Carbon transparency, which provides you the metrics and visibility onto what are the metrics within within the sustainability and power consumption, and then workload carbon efficiency, helping you to reduce or optimize the utilization by reducing the power consumption as well. And then, of course, the zero carbon cloud as well. So what we will be focusing on today will be carbon transparency with Aria Operations. So Aria Operations is our cloud management tool. If you have not heard about that, it's our cloud management tool which helps you give end-to-end visibility on your environment, right from on-prem, the public cloud platform, all of those things, right? Giving you the visibility on the metrics and computing performance and all of those things. So when we talk about Aria Operations and sustainability metrics, we think that like there are 3 dimensions of sustainability in the data center. So first one, green supply. Green supply is not just about the green power, but also the green infrastructure, the infrastructure which provides services to your business or to the VM. So we want to make it greener by reducing the wastage and making sure that it is running at the maximum efficiency, right? And the second one, clean demand. Clean demand is all up to again, reducing the wastage by oversized VMs and also that the business asks for the right resources, not the huge, heavy VMs, and reducing the oversized VM and giving them the right resources, right? And then third one is run lean. Run lean is, I can give you an example of in your organization when the hardware procurement happens, hardware owner always keep a buffer when they order because they don't want to run out of capacity at the peak time, right? So that buffer is there, and over and above that, when you go into the application owner, VM owner, they also keep their own buffer. So this buffer gets stacked up. This is again a wastage. So we can help you with identifying that, run with the right buffer, but then without impacting the SLA of operation. So these are the 3 dimensions which we talk about on sustainable operations in the data center. And if you see on the right-hand side, the capabilities, right size VM, reclaim wastage, all of those things we had been doing. We had been doing since day one, but then we had not been translating this back into the sustainability metrics. That's what we are trying to do. We try to do with Aria Operations, right? Or take the same capabilities, same features, but then translate it back into power consumption savings or energy saving and translate it into carbon emission savings itself. So that's where we came out with the sustainability dashboards in Aria Operation. I think this was released in 2021. We already have the sustainability dashboard based on 3 themes. How much carbon did you save by virtualizing? I know this is an old story, but then still I will come to that. And then how can you further optimize your carbon footprint by identifying the ideal VMs, right? And then where do you want to provision your next VM? Identify the greenest cluster, right? So let's look at each of those, right? The first one, carbon efficiency with virtualization. How much carbon emissions did you avoid by virtualizing your workload? I know this is an old story, legacy story, but then in the current world of like carbon reporting, this is always a metric. This is a metric always to be used. So this is being used by several customers when they report back into the organization goal. How much did you save? So what you do is, if you have 1,000 VMs in your environment, if it was not virtualized, you should have been having 1,000 physical servers. So we use that assumption, and then we can give you how much did you save, how much the current power consumption and translate it to carbon emission, and then we make the assumption of an average sizing of the server and how you can do with that. So and then give you the value on that. So and it can also give you the electricity cost savings and all of those things. So this is for the reporting purpose, right? Now the second one is how can you further optimize optimize your environment. I mentioned about the wastage in your environment, and the easiest, or the ideal VMs are the easiest one to identify at first with Aria operations. So ideal VMs are those VMs running in your environment, but then not used by the business. So it could be of either an old server or a legacy application or something like that running there without being used, right? So Aria operations can identify that and then give you, these are the idle VMs and these are the power used by the idle VM. So if you see in this dashboard, the first widget is basically, it gives you the heat map of all the clusters with the power consumed by the idle VM. So if it goes beyond a threshold, the color changes and you have an action there, right? So then you have two actions. One, you can go into the cluster, shut down or delete those idle VM if those are legitimately idle. But then some of the cases, it may not be, it might be needed by business because those are used by the application by business once in a year, once in a quarter or something like that, right? So then we can use the second way, the net zero target wave, like number of trees to be planted to offset the damage done by that idle VM. So this dashboard gives you that capability and that thing, right? Now, next thing is, earlier we used to get the request like, when I want to provision my next VM, I want to provision it based on the performance or based on the cost. Select the cluster which is based on these criteria, right? The newer request now is, I want to provision it to the greenest cluster. Identify a cluster which is most greener based on the power consumption or power efficiency. And that's what we give you here. And these dashboards will tell you the top 10 greener clusters and also give you the capacity remaining as well, so that it's not just being green, but you identify the green cluster and then look at the capacity and then you can think about provisioning it back as well. So these are the out-of-the-box dashboards available within Aria operations which you can use for this, right? And these metrics are available, carbon metric, sustainability metric, energy saving, all these, and with which you can create the custom dashboards as well. Now, the next thing which came up was, how do you track your decarbonization journey, right? So you cannot, I believe the fact that you cannot improve something which you cannot track, right? So that's where tracking your decarbonization journey is very, very important. That's where we came out with the new theme in the last year's release, where we give you the capability to identify your current carbon footprint and track your carbon emissions, because there are no global standards or global scores with which you can compare yourself. Where are you currently in your decarbonization journey, right? You always keep doing these things, what I showed in the dashboards, but then how are you tracking yourself? There are no scores. There are nothing global standards available with which you can compare. So that's where we came out with VMware Green Score, which gives you the capability of measuring where are you currently. And then you can track that progress. I will come to that, how we calculate that, but then also we give you the actionable recommendation on how to improve the green score as well. So let's look at how do we calculate the green score, right? So we talked about the three dimensions: clean demand, lean operation, green supply. We literally expanded a little bit more on that with few components. The first one, clean demand, is workload efficiency, that is pretty straightforward because that's the identifying the wastage in your environment. The next one, lean operation, resource utilization, I mentioned, it is reducing the buffer. And then the third component we added is virtualization ratio, because virtualization definitely drives sustainability, right? Consolidation and thus sustainability. So we looked at that virtualization ratio as well. And then under green supply, we have power source, which is most important thing. If you have greener power, you are more greener in there. And then the last one, the hardware efficiency. So hardware efficiency is based on the fact that latest generation hardware are more energy efficient. So that's where we took that 5 components itself. So we took these 5 components into account and then created a green score. Each of these components have different levels of impact on the score, right? So that's why we have given a weighted average. For example, power source has the highest, because if you have greener power, so we gave that higher weightage, and then the other components with different weightage into that. And then each of them have a score, and then it gives you the green score. And green score it's a relative scoring. It's not an absolute value, it's a relative scoring. So you know what is your current green score and where do you want to get to. It's a value from 0 to 100. So that gives you the capability of moving forward with the actionable recommendations and all of those things. Now, let's quickly go into those 5 components, right? The first one, pretty straightforward, identify the wastage in your environment. So which are basically idle VM, or zombie VMs, powered off VM, snapshot, all of those things, and gives you a score based on that. So if you have 100% wastage in your environment, it gives a 0 score. And then if you have 0 wastage in your environment, it gives a 100 score. So it will be always a value in between, and your target always would be to get closer to the 100 part. So that's the first one. The second one is the resource utilization. I mentioned it multiple times, the reducing the buffer in your environment, right? So if you have 0 usage, we give you 0 value. And if you have 100% usage, we give you 100 score. 100% usage is definitely not possible because we always will have the buffer for HA and all of those things, right? So, but again, it's always the target will be to push towards the value of 100. Now the third one, the virtualization ratio. This is again driving consolidation. So if you are 0, if you give the value of 0 virtualization, it gives a score of 0, and then 100% virtualization gives a value of 100. So this is something which you will be inputting. When you initially start the green score configuration, you will be asked for this input because we cannot get from Aria Ops, we cannot find this value automatically, right? So you'll be asked for an input on this. Now the fourth one is the power source, the most important one. Now, how do we calculate a score on this is based on greenhouse gas emissions calculator. And if you see in this chart, like each of these power sources has a carbon efficiency values, right? So, for example, the lignite coal have about 1,000. So, we will give you an option to select which is your power source, and then based on that, we calculate a score. For example, the highest carbon intensity is 1,000 when you select lignite and coal. And if you go towards 0, so that's what the net zero value will come in. So anything in between what you select, we give a score based on that. So it's always targeted to use the greener power source. That's where you get more score on that, right? So that's the power source. Now, the last one is hardware efficiency. So this is a bit tricky to calculate, but then it's again based on the fact that the latest generation hardware are more energy efficient for 2 reasons. One, of course, the hardware efficiency, the energy efficiency is better, and the second, more consolidation. It allows more consolidation than the older hardware, right? So now again, the question will come in, okay, if I'm looking at refreshing my hardware every year, that again drives the carbon scope 3 emissions. So again, that's not recommended as well, but then that's why we have put in very low weightage to this. But then this definitely is a point. So definitely is a component. So we are purely looking at the scope 2 emissions here. The embodied carbon within the hardware vendors which they provide, we will try to include it later on in the thing. But then again, this is a fact, and as I've mentioned, it's like a relative scoring. It's not going to give you wrong values later on in calculation as well. So with all these 5 components, we get to the VMware Green Score. So it shows you the green score, the total power consumption, carbon footprint, all of those things. And we can also see the green score per physical data center now. Like you can create your physical data centers based on the location, geolocation, and based on that you can put in the different values for that, virtualization ratio, power source, all of those things could be different. And you get to see the green score and then all those components which I mentioned about per physical data center. And the 5 components, it gives you the score based on each of those, right? Each of the component will have a score, and which is what will drive the actionable recommendation. Now, for example, here in workload efficiency, it's 68%. Your goal will be to drive towards 100. How do you do that? It shows the power, the wastage in your environment, powered off VM, idle VM, all of those things, and you have an action to go and reduce those features, which will improve your workload efficiency. The same thing goes for the other components as well. Now, the new things which, this is from one of the customers, right? Like right sizing always had been a big challenge for all the VMware admins because nobody will want to give back the resources. The VMs which are already oversized VM, nobody will want to give back the resources, right? So earlier we used to drive it with cost, but then now we have few customers who are putting in like carbon tax for this department. For example, each department, they group the VMs and say that this is your carbon tax, which means this is your carbon emissions for your team, right? And they showcase it, and then do that against the organization goal. So this is one of those dashboards which is used for that. So right sizing driven by carbon footprint, carbon emissions, right? So that's all I have with Aria Operations. And if you have seen, you can search for the VMware ESG report 2023, which tells about the entire story what we had from 25 years, right from ESX on how we helped in reducing the carbon emissions, all of those things, right? And yeah, to summarize, just two key takeaways. IT can definitely contribute to the sustainability goals. So IT can definitely within your organization, right? And Aria Operations will help you with the sustainability metrics. And of course, the Green Score. Green Score can help you with tracking the decarbonization goals. That's how what I want to show. Any questions? I'm happy to take. Thank you.